Hi, John Maxwell here, and welcome to Minute with Maxwell and this exciting influencer series in honor of the top leaders from my 7 global organizations who have come together to form the John Maxwell Enterprise, and they're joining me in my most exciting and significant leadership endeavor yet. Mark Cole has been a major part of the Maxwell organizations for over 20 years. I've never had a better president and CEO. Mark's availability and proximity to me, along with his calling as the visionary, has changed the landscape of our organizations. He is now the co-owner along with me, and we are running together at full speed for an incredible future. Mark, you encapsulate my heart. I'm honored to teach on your word today, which you picked. That word is influence. Now, you have to understand, for 20 plus years now, I've mentored Mark. And one of the things I teach is leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. So in my long tenure of mentoring Mark, obviously, we talk a lot about influence. Who do we influence? We want to influence especially leaders. How do we influence them? By adding value to them. When do we influence them? Every day. So when Mark picked as his word influence, it just made sense to me, because what he wants to do more than anything else is to take our vision, our mission, our calling, and spread it influentially around the world. In other words, he wants us to reach more people by adding value to more people. So before him every day is the question, are we influencing more people in a positive way? One of the ways that we do that is through Minute with Maxwell. I'm so glad you're with us today. We want to come into your life every day and plant a seed that will allow you to grow and be a better person. But every day, Mark wakes up and asks a question. Are we influencing more people in a positive way today than we did yesterday? And his desire is to continually grow and increase that influence. Helping more people is what he was born to do. He sure helps me. He helps you. And under his leadership, in all of our enterprise, trust me, his influence, our influence, it'll continue to grow. Why? Because he wants to intentionally every day add value to more people than he did yesterday.
The key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority. And so today, Chris, as you and I get to unpack this powerful word that John has really popularized in his definition of leadership.
That's
leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And here we are now. John's going to take us on a 2-week journey on the acrostic of influence. And I tell you, just in the first 4 points, I'm sitting here and going, man, I've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I've been with John for 21 years, but I've got a lot of work to do. And here we go. That's what the point of the podcast is.
That's it, right?
Work to do.
I think you and I probably learn as much as some of our listeners out there do by just going through this together with our team and this content. The first thing I thought about is, I'm extremely passionate about the 5 levels of leadership is what we call it now, but back when John created it in Developing a Leader Within You, the chapter was, or the model was, the 5 levels of influence. Yeah. And as I thought about what he was talking about right here, there's so many competencies that fit into that model. And I, as well as you, were like, I got some work to do. The first thing I want to talk about is, as we jump in, is I hope you, maybe if you're driving, don't do it while you're driving, but I hope you go back and listen and write down what John said, which was, it's always easy to do right ahead of time when you know what you stand for. And we're going to jump in and talk about this first one in integrity. And I wrote that down as I was sitting here and we were listening to it, because I think you and I have seen, and many people that are listening have seen, many leaders that don't have integrity, that have incredible talent, kind of fizzle out. And John even says, man, 71% of the executives in a survey said, man, one of the biggest issues of climbing the ladder is having integrity if you want to do it. And then if you're going to fall short, it's because you don't have integrity. Man, you've seen a lot of leaders organizations around the world with John, but also internally. Talk a little bit about the importance of that word for you in leadership and even in your leaders and what that looks like around the John Maxwell enterprise.
So I love this, and truly we could forget that John covered 3 other points, and we could camp out right here on integrity. I think it's so important, and most of you in podcast land know I've had 2 great opportunities to work for 2 great leaders, my father and then John Maxwell, and kind of was tasked or picked to carry the legacy of both. And one, I focused a lot more on external leadership, image, what people thought of me in my younger attempt to lead, and then more importantly, recently, to focus on the inside. And I'll come back to that because I have a resource I want to point everybody to in just a moment. But I'm sitting here with integrity, and I do think it comes into having the foresight of knowing what you want to be known for and then leading to that point.
That's a good point, yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you and I love sports. We're not big Tom Brady fans, but that's another conversation. Recently, in the playoffs, I was watching Tom Brady, the Buccaneers, pick apart yet another team. I won't say them for some of our friends and podcast family from that city. But the commentators were talking about, they had an interview that week with Tom Brady, and he said, I always know where I'm going to throw the ball before I touch it. So he previews the defense. He knows the game plan of what he called in the huddle. He may make some adjustments, but he already knows where he's going with the ball before he says hike, and the center puts it in his hands. Now, let's take that analogy from one of the greatest, if not the greatest. Yes, you heard me say that. One of the greatest in his profession of football. He knows where he's going to throw it before he touches the ball. What if we as leaders knew what kind of leader we wanted to be before we started leading? And as we started leading? Before we caught the ball, got the ball for the next assignment, what if we already envisioned the integrity with which we wanted to lead and how we wanted to be perceived? So coming back to that, Chris, for me, again, 2 opportunities to lead. It's been a much more sustainable and less pressurized journey to know how I wanted to lead from the inside on this second opportunity than it was on the first opportunity, where I was figuring it out as we go. There was no integrity on the first one. It is trying to build it completely on integrity, the second one. So how does a leader do that? I'll take you to a book that I read before my first opportunity and a book I read before my second opportunity. It's the first John Maxwell book that I read. Happened to have it with me in the studio today, that. Which is Developing the Leader Within You. This is, in my opinion, we all have our favorites out of John's 86 books. In my opinion, this is the most impacting book of any leader that is taking on a new assignment. And in my opinion, this book is all about the inside of leadership, the inside of a leader, and therefore it's about integrity. And I just couldn't pass this up by looking at all of you at the beginning of 2022 and saying, when is the last time you've read this book? And if you haven't read this book, to go, what? You don't even know John Maxwell if you haven't read this book, because really Developing the Leader Within You 2.0 is one of John's favorite books. And Chris, as you know, we have a digital product along this book. It's John teaching 10 lessons, 15 to 20 minutes, fill in the blank notes. It's stuff you can pass on to your team. It's a digital product. And Jake, I want to give them a discount to take advantage of that. We'll give you a 20% discount. Jake, make that happen. And you can go to the show notes, and we'll have the link there. And when you go to that link, obviously put in the keyword podcast, and we'll give you a 20% discount. But again, back to this idea of integrity. I really do believe, I'm so glad John started with this, because again, this is my first Maxwell book. I read it, I consumed it, I loved it, forgot about it. And this time, Chris, I read this, if not once every year, once every 2 years. I consume it. I teach from it all the time. And the person that I teach the most about this content is myself.
I love it.
Because it's who we are.
Yeah, and if you're unfamiliar with the 5 levels of influence I mentioned, man, it is in the first chapter of that book right there. And as Mark mentioned, as you begin to think about your leadership journey and where you want to go, not only personally, but even just professionally in the organization, man, that integrity's got to be there. And I love what you talked about with Tom Brady, which for both of us and some of our team members is not sitting well for us to talk about this on a podcast. But the problems that he encounters after the snap of the ball do not matter to him.
No.
Because if you have integrity, you're equipped for the challenges ahead. You know the decisions you're going to make. And leaders, we're going to face challenges.
Yeah.
We know that. We've all been through 24 months of challenges. There have been challenges before that. There will be challenges ahead of us.
Let me
so
say
we
one
need to
more
get ready
thing
for
on that, because we talked about sports. We're obviously in a leadership podcast, business podcast. John tells the story of one of the most scariest times he's ever traveled on a plane, and he got down, and right as they were landing, the wind shear hit. That's happened to a lot of us. I can tell you my one or two times of losing everything I had in an experience like that. He said that plane popped on the ground because the wind shear popped it, and immediately that pilot pulled it back up. When they got off, he hugged the pilot and he said, "Man, how did you figure out? How did you know? When did you make the decision to pull that back up?" He said, "Oh, I made that decision 20 years ago. In training, I learned over and over again, wind shear hits, it's safer for a plane in the air than on the ground in a bunch of chaotic wind."
Good.
And so we as leaders, hey, make the decision today what you're going to do in the next challenge. For us, 2020, infamous leading through COVID, we made a decision many, many years ago, we're going to value people. So when COVID hit, we made all of our decisions not based on how many millions was at risk, how many millions could be lost, on how many lives could be impacted and added value to by making the decision this way or that way. And we made that decision a long time ago. So people say, "Man, when did you make the decision to cancel IMC, a $6 million risk decision that we made?" Oh, we made that years ago when we decided we were going to add value to people.
Yep. You know, before we move on real quick, because to your point, we could talk about this first topic the whole time. One of the things in addition to making decisions and solving problems, one of the things that John talked about in there, I don't want you to miss this, is that when you lead with integrity, you have that trust. And as we think about our engagement level in organizations, as we think about our teams being engaged, one of the things that really stands out to me is that 81% of team members say that their leader is why they're engaged, but the reason why they're engaged is because they trust their leader.
Yeah.
The only way they're going to trust you, the only way we're going to trust each other, peer-to-peer leader, is that if we have integrity and we live out that on a day-to-day basis. John talks about an influencer nurtures people. Now, when we hear the word nurturing, we don't necessarily think of a leader right away, do we? Right? This is we use the word soft, and that may come across to you as, I don't want to be a nurturing leader. It's not easy, by the way. It may be soft, but it is not easy. And John goes on to say, man, it does mean a commitment to your people. It does mean loving your people. And I will tell you this, that as long as you and I have worked together and worked with John, there is no doubt that he nurtures as a leader to those that are on his team and in his influence. Talk a little bit about, from your perspective as a leader, the importance of that. Again, I'm air hashtagging right here, nurturing of people.
You got it. First of all, let me say this to all you podcast listeners. You need to jump on YouTube and kind of check out the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. Google or not Google it, YouTube search it, and you'll find us. You've got to see how nurturing it feels to see Chris Godey use air in
a pink shirt, but it's February.
It's
right?
February.
So we're
Happy Valentine's Day to you, Chris.
That's right.
So this has been more pronounced to me in John Maxwell's leadership over the last 2 or 3 years than at any other time. I wouldn't have started 21 years ago and said, man, that John Maxwell, he's a nurturing leader.
Right.
Now, he's always been a valuing people, loves everybody. Everybody feels welcome. You don't work for me, you work with me. He says nurturing things in his sleep. I mean, he's just great at it. But it has really become obvious to me, Chris, over the last 3 years when he first found his word for the year to be Father. And there is this pride. John wrote me a card over the holidays. He in his year-end review, he kind of writes cards based on impact moments that he had. He then pulls out a note card right in the impact moment and writes a thank you note. It's a brilliant idea. I'm going to teach on it in a podcast because I'm going to steal it because it's a great idea. I got one of those, and I just opened it this weekend. Been traveling, just opened my mail, and had this thing from John, and he said, my most proud thing I've done this year is to watch you do your thing. He said, of all the things that we've accomplished, and 2021 was a great year for all of us, Chris, including you and your team. He said, of all the things I'm proud of all the things that just made me swell with pride and thanksgiving, it was watching you lead to the next level. Now, I don't believe those were just nice words. I think that was the nurturing father side of John Maxwell. This was real pronounced to me just an hour before walking in the studio. John and I are doing a consulting arrangement with a group from Mexico, Zifra, powerful leaders. These young people are fired up, and they're asking these questions of John and I. And John's going to throw one or two of them my way, and so I'm ready, and I go gangbusters with my answers. I mean, I'm just like this. My YouTube family, I'm just like this. I mean, I'm fired up, ready to go. And John just kind of pauses, and there's this love and this thing, and you're going, number one, his answers are always good, but number one, you don't even have to answer correctly. I just feel a warm embrace right now. One was asking, how do I stop failing and disappointing people around me? And I've got 3 reasons and why passion is going to do. And John just slows down, and it's less about his words than it is about his demeanor. And leaders, if I could help you,
so good.
and I could help me, if I could help me right here, if you will nurture with your persona, with your attitude, with your presentation, it'll go further and last longer than your wise, passionate words. And I'm still learning that. I'm not a nurturing leader. I have this hard charge. If I can fire you up, we're going to get it done. And John just goes, man, if I can make you believe in yourself, you're going to get it done.
And when you were just talking about that, I was like, man, I know that I tied that to a comment he made. And even in your show notes here, he says nurturing people does mean lifting people to a higher level, right? There's a lot of complexity that comes to lifting your people to a higher level. But even in just that illustration of him answering that question by slowing down and understanding, hey, you're not always going to get approval from people. You're not going to make them happy and then just talk through that from a demeanor. You lift people up.
Yeah, and let me say this. In leadership, and I'm not talking to you as a mom over your family or a dad working through a troubled teen. I'm talking about in leadership, and that has elements of leadership. There's a big difference in nurturing and enabling.
Yes.
And many leaders feel like if I nurture, then I am enabling you or empowering you to less than. And that's not true. Back to your quote of John. Nurturing is continuing to lift them to a higher level, but it's not kicking them in the butt to do it. It's lifting them from the heart to do it.
Totally agree. Hey, one thing I thought about here as well, when John talks about that nurturing does mean loving people, one of the things that you and I are extremely excited about is our League of Extraordinary Leaders. And Joel Manby, a powerful executive in the corporate world, has actually partnered with us and just done a off of his book, a digital content called Love Works. And we went back and forth and we said, do we include that word in the title? And we said, man, absolutely we have to, because that's just part of leading people. And so it's he puts together 7 principles of better way to lead and to love your people. I want to talk a little bit about this because John says, hey, to increase your influence, really, you've got to navigate for people. And when you think of the law of navigation, oftentimes as leaders we go, okay, here we go. I'm going to tell you where we're going and how we're going to get there. That's not really what we're talking about here. Give us a little bit from your perspective, the importance of this on increasing your influence.
Well, and again, don't forget the context here. We're talking about influence and growing our ability to connect with others and help them get where they want to go. And one of my favorite laws of the 21 laws is the law of navigation. Now, in full disclosure, let me tell you why. John says of all the leaders that's ever worked for him that I exercise the law of navigation better than any. He doesn't say that about the other 20. I got one. So it becomes my favorite, okay, Chris? Now, I may not be any good at it. John just complimented because he couldn't find any other compliments. I'll take it. Yeah. But in this law of navigation, a leader many times feels like that their responsibility is to chart the course. That's the law of navigation. A leader is more effective the better they can chart the course. Okay, so we chart the course. When we're talking about influence, and John's talking about helping an influencer navigates for people. The worst thing we as a leader can do is to come in and navigate for someone else their destination.
Yeah.
Now, should we have an idea? Do leaders still see more and before, even when they're developing influence with others? Yes, they do. Should I, as a leader, have a recommended course for you, Chris, to consider in your development? Absolutely. But once I give recommendations, it's my responsibility to shift from navigating your life to guiding you and letting you be the hero of your plan.
That's good.
A good friend of ours was at Exchange, an event that you run. We'll talk more about Exchange and if we have any spots for people along the way. By the way, let's put in the show notes, we'll put a link for Exchange because I just mentioned it, but I don't even know if there's spots, Chris. But anyway, at Exchange last year in Nashville, a friend of ours, Donald Miller, came and talked about, he has this incredible concept of the guide, the villain, the hero, and this other character in a story that is kind of this agitator, this villain is what he calls it. And all of us have in us the ability to do that at certain times. Well, when you're trying to influence people and you're navigating for them, as John's talking about here, you're simply a guide. You're not a mandate. You're not a dictator. You are a guide to help them get there. And again, I want to make that distinction because so many times we as leaders, we have this concept. We've got to know the way, go the way, show the way, and tell everybody else why they should go our way.
That's right.
And yet when we're trying to grow and influence people, we become overbearing and ineffective when we try to tell people what they should do with their life. One of mine and your very, very good friends, he deserves a shout out. He gave me an opportunity to work for John Maxwell 21 years ago, David Hoyt. And he says this all the time, and I love it when he calls me. He said, "Hey, Mark, I got to tell you, God loves you, and I have a wonderful plan for your life."
In that order.
In that order. And, well, it's not always that order. Sometimes it's, I have a wonderful plan for your life. By the way, God loves you to get there.
That's right.
As a leader, we can't do that when we're trying to grow influence with people.
Yeah.
We've got to love them and suggest and tweak and recommend, but yet just stay in that guide perspective, in that guide persona.
What I love about that is, John kind of wrapped up the session talking about, man, we have to see beyond the people as they are. And I think oftentimes as leaders, we can see and believe in people far greater than they can themselves. And we know where they can go. And so how do we help guide them and understand that and bring that out?
Right.
Like that's we talk about several of these principles, and John wrote an incredible book, by the way, around a lot of this, Leader's Greatest Return. And he talks about the fact that we can enlarge people and empower people and reproduce and all that kind of stuff. But in essence, man, we can see almost more than they can see for themselves. Now, we can't navigate, to your point, and as we think about it, leaders, we've got to help guide them, allow them to navigate to truly have the impact on them and where they're at. So, man, I absolutely love that. And that's a great perspective shift for us as leaders to remember when we think about that. All right, John goes on and he says, hey, to increase your influence, to be an influencer, man, you got to connect with people. Yeah. I love this because, John in the 5 levels of leadership talks about this permission level where, people give you the permission that they want to follow you. We use in the 5 levels of influence, he uses the word relationships, but it's not only that, it's also about connecting with them. Adversity connects, projects connect, ideas connect, questioning, all kinds of things connect. One of the things that I want to unpack a little bit here that just kind of grabbed both of us, and I'm going to give you an example that I thought of, and then I want you to share some things, real life, what you're dealing with in this in regards to leadership. John said so many times leaders think it's the responsibility of those that work, I think he used the word below them, on their team to come to them, to connect with them.
Yeah.
I know you said this years ago. You said, hey, leaders, you just need to understand that anybody inside our organization, I'm going to go by and I'm going to connect with them at any point in time. And I just want you to know I'm going to be talking to your people. And I'm going to be connecting with your people. And I want to know kind of where they're at and what's their agenda. What are they enjoying about it? And sure enough, to this day, you still do that. I'll see you popping in. I'm like, Mark's going into my team's office, like what's about to happen? But your whole purpose of that is, no. This team, it doesn't matter if they're on the job for 1 week or if they've been with us for 13 years, you're going to make an effort to go in and connect with them. And I love that you model that. That was the first thing that came to mind. When you think about what John said there, what comes to your mind?
Well, and let me say this on that point that you just made. It comes from Jack Welch's book, Management by Walking Around.
Yeah.
Too many people go out, especially in a company organization as big as General Electric, and the CEO goes out into the field, and that's a big deal. Get out in the field, press flash, get out there. And some of you leaders, you do that. You press flash, you get out there. But you stay in the insulated office. You don't get out where the people are. You don't get out and sense their buy-in, sense their enthusiasm, hear their accomplishments, struggle with their struggle.
Right.
And so it really comes from great leaders like that, and watching John Maxwell in this idea of management by walking around. I think it's extremely important. You know, when John talks about an influencer connects with people, I got to tell you, this is full disclosure. This is February. We're just coming off of January, brand new year. I don't believe a leader can connect with people until the leader connects with him or herself. Because we want to go out and we connect with people. Why? For an agenda. We want to see what they're doing. Even in your example with me walking around to your team, so many times I go and connect so they know I have their heart. It's for them. Yet so many times we are better leaders when we connect with people because we've already connected with ourselves.
It's good.
So January is always a connect with myself time. I have my year-end review. I reflect on what I did, what I didn't do well. There's a lot of what I didn't do well. So January is usually repair month. Let me repair what I didn't do well last year. Let me give you a couple of examples. I leave today at the point of recording, and I fly out to Salt Lake City before I have to be in Miami tomorrow night. You go, whoa, that's kind of two different wardrobes in your bag.
Yeah.
That's kind of a long trip. And I'm going out for one reason and one reason alone. I have a leader out there, one of our producers that runs one of our divisions, that she is carrying a huge load for our 2022 plan.
Yeah.
What I discovered at the end of December of 2021, and as I go into 2022, is that I gave very little time to such an important initiative last year. I gave very little time to the leader. I gave very little time to communicating the vision. I gave very little time to accountability. My first meeting in January, this is February, I get it, but as I'm looking today, the best thing I can do is to connect with this leader.
That's good.
Now, let me tell you what that means to me. It means not getting on a Zoom call. It means not waiting until next week when I see her in Florida. It means getting my rear end on a plane and going out there to let her know I realized last year I didn't connect enough, and this year is going to be different.
That's good.
I didn't want her coming to me. I didn't want to wait till we were in the same city. I wanted to make an additional effort to connect. And that is a big statement to go out there in this whirlwind trip in a crazy critical time that I am to connect. Another example. Last year, I was doing my best to detach myself from the leaders because I'm trying to empower. Not detach like I'm not here for you, but detach from asking what I think. Just let you do what you're doing. You're the example of this. So, beginning of January, I have these epiphanies. We're going to cast a vision. And recently, I cast a vision that impacted you inadvertently, but I didn't know so much directly. I cast the vision, and I'm watching. You. You were on Zoom in this meeting, but I'm going, you had to leave a little early, I didn't get that affirmation in your eyes. So what did I do? I connected with you by coming to you. Yeah. And that was already on your schedule. You were going to connect with me and get clarity because we've talked a lot about find your voice. Yeah. But I went, wait, I got to connect. And I came back this morning and went, we're good. I got a couple of questions. I said, okay. At lunch, you know what I did after our leadership meeting? I asked you to lunch. Yeah. You know what you said? No.
Jake, by the way, Jake Decker had a more important meeting for me.
Yes. So you come down here and meet with Jake instead of meet Jake, you're in trouble. And so you rejected me. I get that. But then that night, before I left, I said, hey, Chris.
Call me on the way home.
Call me on the way home.
Yep.
I wanted to get that in the middle. You know why? Because an influencer connects with
good.
people. And I realized that I had lost a little connection with you on that. Was it horrible? No, but left unattended, it becomes an abyss.
Yeah,
It becomes a
that's good.
canyon.
Yeah.
And so you and I connected that day. We went deeper, but that was an intentionality for the leader to say, if I'm going to gain influence with Gody or the other leaders in our organization, I'm going to have to be very intentional.
And what I saw this morning, going back to your first example, we were on a meeting together this morning when you said, "Hey, I'll see you in a little bit. I'm headed out this evening to see you." Just the smile, the of that individual looking at it and saying, "Man, I can't believe he's coming out here." So, I absolutely love that, because leaders, it's our responsibility to close that gap and make sure we do that.
Can I say one more thing? I started that whole little deal, and we got one more little thing we want to share before we run out of time. I started that by saying this. I don't believe a leader can connect effectively with others if he or she is not connected with themselves.
Correct.
End of December, 1st of January is a massive intentionality on connecting with myself. The best way I know to do this, I shared it last week. It's on my desk again. The best way to do that is to develop the leader within you. Connect with yourself. Don't develop others at the expense of not developing yourself. I'm going to challenge you. This is the second week in a row because it's that important. We're at the beginning of the year, and I'm going to challenge you. How intentional are you in developing yourself? You want to connect with others? Connect with yourself. We did this last week. You guys, a lot of you responded. We've got a digital product with this book called Developing the Leader Within You 2.0, the digital product. 10 lessons with John. It's hours of John's teaching. We're giving our podcast listeners a 20% discount. You can go to the show notes. By the way, when you click that link, it'll ask you for a code. Put in the code podcast, and we'll get you a discount. But again, going back to that, how are you intentionally connecting with yourself so you can connect with others?
So we've been going for a while on this one. Now I want to switch gears a little bit, Mark. John, first of all, the story about him in his office in that tiny little cracker box with his family picture on the little cement ledge is hysterical. That story, I love it. But it does bring to mind, because, he'll say the lowest level of the 5 levels of leadership is title and position. But there is something to be said for you as the leader who sees somebody coming up in the ranks and improving and doing an incredible job. And there are certain symbols that symbolize that they are rising in the ranks as far as having more influence in the organization. And so how do you as a leader, like John gave himself the crummy office, he didn't give somebody else a crummy office, because John doesn't hold those things very loosely, because he's more captured on what the goal is and the purpose of where he's going, that an office doesn't make sense. But you as the leader, how do you navigate that line between honoring your employees who are, or the leaders in your employ, who are leading and having influence over others, but also not focusing and making a priority of the desk, of the office? How do you do that? Because John did it for himself. He monitored himself and took away that power. But what do you do as a leader, or is that something that you do? Do you give somebody the next biggest office as their have a new position, or how does that go in the way that you run the organization?
Well, I think that we all should balance ourselves with humility, with hunger, with the sense that there is a level of influence and perception that we need to demonstrate our leadership effectiveness. And so, man, I know billionaires here in Atlanta. I'm thinking of 2 right now that drive an old Chevy pickup truck back to work. Billionaires. And so I think each person really needs to work out. I'm not going to say that every leader should have the milk bucket with a folding table and their family there. I certainly have one of the corner offices with two walls of glass. And so, but at the same time, I think that we all need to hold ourselves in check with how we interact and deal with our team. In fact, as you were asking that, Tracy, I was going to do this at the end of the show today, but we had a listener question recently from Jason. Jason's one of our podcast listeners, and he asked this question, and I'm going to promise you I'll tie this into the question you just asked of me. Here was Jason's question. Do you think it is a good leadership idea to say, my people are my staff, when discussing your job and those you manage? Personally, it's always bothered me when managers say my anything, because the people are not yours. They're your team, or you are a team. And therefore, I always say, Jason says, I always say we and our when discussing those I work with and manage. And then Jason says, and by the way, thank you, Jason. He says, thanks. And I love your podcast. And I went, Jason, you had me all the way up until you called this my podcast. It's not my podcast. It's our podcast. And I just cracked up, Jason. But here's the point. Jason's really onto something right here. And Jason, I love you. Can't wait to meet you in person and hug your neck. And thanks for listening to the podcast. Pass it along, Jason. But here's what Jason's point really is. It's not my and our. John not only did that wonderful lesson about his office with his family on the concrete ledge and all that, he was met in Atlanta at a really nice restaurant by somebody that says, hey, John, I just started working for you. I'm on your team now. And John introduced himself, and the person introduced himself. He said, hey, by the way, you don't work on my team and you do not work for me. We work together. And so, Jason, I think you're on to something with this question, because I do think it's ours. I think it's our workspace. And while it may make sense for some offices and some meetings and some different things that give me that office premium that is different than what John's was, because John's not in the office, and I'm not in the office much right now either, but when I'm in the office, there's this meeting and this need for our workspace and what's happening in that space. And I think the real thing, Tracy, that we all need to think through in the culture, is it a dictatorial, all for the benefit of the senior leader, or is there camaraderie that we're all in this together and we all benefit together? And I think balancing that and not letting one person, the leader, be the sole determiner of that is really important. I didn't ask for my office. They gave it to me when we moved recently. I'm getting ready to look at them and go, hey, this may not be the best use of this real estate based on how much I'm traveling right now. So I think we need to work through that with people that are around us. But certainly if there is this culture that I am the senior leader, I am the one that deserves this, then I think that's the idea or the perspective we need to keep ourselves in check about.
John has a quote, and I love this that Jake, you included in my notes. John has a quote that says, leaders become great not because of their power, but because of their ability to empower others. And when John's helping us with this loop, if you read the book 360-Degree Leader, which, by the way, we're going to include it in the show notes. We're going to give you a 15% discount on the book. But if you'll read the book, John is teaching this loop, Chris, for people like you and I have been working side by side. How do I gain influence with you and then set you free to go create influence for others? So how do I add value to you in a peer relationship? How do I gain influence, leadership with you as a peer? And then how do I empower you to go help others? And John gets really just fundamental in this lesson and gives us a real 7-step process to have this influence loop in a peer relationship. But you said this at the beginning, and I want you to start us off with this. You said, Mark, this is peer, this is 360, but I think this works in any kind of a leadership relationship.
Let me start by saying this. Aren't you and I grateful that we're at a place and we work for a leader that develops stuff like this that's very simple?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be sitting here.
We wouldn't be.
Now, it's simple. The loop is simple. I love it. Lays it out. It's not easy to implement.
Right.
And as leaders, especially peer-to-peer, we get into a silo. We want to protect our territory. We want to protect our lead. We don't necessarily want to connect with our peers. And so this gives you a roadmap. This is a simple process, not easy to do as a leader. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today and pull some things from you on how you've done this and what's easy and what's hard for you and application. But I think you're right. I think this is bigger than just peer-to-peer. Yeah. And John would agree with that. John would say, no, absolutely. This is a fundamental part of leading people. Yeah. And we say this around here quite a bit. We love what we get to do.
Yep.
Everybody deserves to be led well. We want to add value to leaders, but we love what we get to do. And more importantly, we love who we get to do it with.
Yeah.
And I think you can only say those type of statements, whether they're a peer or someone you work for or that works for you, if you truly understand this loop that John has laid out for us.
Yeah. I want to say one more thing just to kind of contextualize this before we dig in. You mentioned that we get in these silos. Peers get in silos.
Yeah.
I've got my little responsibilities.
Right.
Hope you do well over there, Chris, but I've got my stuff I need to do. Hey, Jared, I hope you get all the content done, but I got my stuff to do. Yeah. And that's really a real deal to where we become ineffective, not for any other reason than we just get focused on what we need to do. So we don't even think about the peer.
Sure.
Because why would I spend time trying to lead a peer? They got their thing, I got my thing. There's another reason that we're not very good at this, and it's a competitive reason.
No doubt. That's
right?
exactly what I was thinking,
I mean, you've played ball at the senior level, at the highest level.
Yeah.
And there's in all of us a little bit of a competitive. I got to win. I want to be a little bit better. We right now in Maxwell Leadership, we are really focused on expanding our Spanish platform. And for the first time ever, last month, our Spanish team outsold our English team.
Yes.
Our English team is 10 years old. Our Spanish team is about 4 years old. Never been done in the last 48 months until last month.
That's awesome.
And I found myself as CEO going, how do I celebrate the first time ever one team has done better than the other team? Because sometimes when you compare, you end up making one team feel like that they're not doing very well and the other team feel like, hey, they don't have anything to do. They've reached the pinnacle. I think as peers, as we dig into this, Chris, I think we need to understand that competitiveness with peers rather than completing with peers is extremely a dangerous sport to play in a team environment, especially on a corporate team, because that competitiveness causes you to lose effectiveness. And I've heard John tell story after story of when he was a pastor and he was raising a lot of money and he didn't want to help another church raise money because why would he help another church? He was competing.
He wants it, yeah.
I think you really have to check. Now, your drive to succeed is one thing, but when you are a competitive person like you and I, and you're in a peer relationship, your competitor has to be yourself, not the person you're trying to influence.
That's right.
And so I just want to say that because silos inhibit our ability to influence at a peer level, but so does competitiveness.
Yeah.
And just keep that in check.
Yeah, and just two thoughts on that, and then we're going to dive into this loop. You challenge us as leaders in this organization to compare against what we have done in the past.
Right.
Not compare against what another business unit is doing. And I think that's healthy to do that, and you got to have that focus. Otherwise, to your point, everybody's got a little bit of competitiveness in them. And what ends up happening, not only do you, where you kind of had a little bit of angst of how do I talk about what we've done, in 4 years, and finally the first time ever more than the English platform. Not only is that maybe a rub for the team, but then the leaders of those business units inside your organization, and then they are peers, go, well, you know what, I'm not going to share any more information. And what you end up doing is creating a subculture inside that organization. Yeah. So we got off on a little bit of tangent there, but I think that's good context for what we're talking about here with leaders and peers and all that stuff. Let me say this too. This is not just inside your organization. And Mark's going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to ask you a couple questions around when you think about peer-to-peer, people go, oh, it's the peers inside my organization. Right. It's peers outside the organization. Right. You have a lot of peers. Matter of fact, you have more peers now outside of the organization than you do inside the organization as the CEO. Right. So I want you to think about this loop and these principles that John has taught us today, that they apply outside of your organization as well, and know that. So here's what I want to do. You've led at all levels throughout our organization, and right before we went live here, I asked you, I said, let's talk a little bit about the ones that maybe they're a little bit harder for you. Maybe you stay a little bit too long in the loop, and then what just comes naturally for you, where you don't even think about it, and we're moving on, and you just naturally do it. And you so graciously said, "Yeah, let's talk about it. We'll air the dirty laundry of Mark's leadership style
if we have time to air the dirty laundry. There's quite a bit of dirty laundry in here.
So let's talk about this, because I want our listeners to take these principles that John gave us, and we're just going to probably pick 2 or 3 of them, talk about them. but I want them to hear real life application
Yeah.
from Mark's leadership style and what that looks like. So let's dive in. Tell the listeners and those that are the viewers that are joining us via YouTube, tell them a little about, when you look at this loop, what's the one that you really kind of, again, hardest, it may not be the right word, but where you just kind of maybe stay a little bit too long as you think about influencing your peers or people with inside your leadership?
Yeah, I love this exercise, and typically we just cut on the mics and we try to be really raw so it's very applicable. We did talk about this a little bit, and I paused for a minute, Chris, and I didn't tell you this before we started recording, but I'll tell you now because you said air out dirty laundry. It was a toss-up between the one I'm going to share and the other one, which is caring. Now, you wouldn't have thought that because you and I agreed on what the one I stay at the longest, and I'll share that in just a moment. But here's the deal with caring. I am a relational person, but I'm a relational person with an agenda. Forgive me, everybody, for just admitting that, okay?
We just got real. Matter of fact, we're going to go a completely different direction because now I'm going to interrogate Mark Cole and his leadership. But I love that. I love the vulnerability.
I'm a very relational
and you're like
person,
Pace, right?
But I have always naturally cared for a purpose.
Yeah.
The longer I've been around John Maxwell, the more I care for a purpose because we're always intentional, always going. So I struggle with that because now let's talk about who we're talking about. We're talking about peers.
Yeah.
So I love you. How's your mom and them? We're good. I don't really care about your business. I got an agenda over here. I've got to run my business.
Yeah.
And so I really paused. And you'll remember when you asked me that question before we started recording, I paused because I went, would it be caring? Would I share that if it was caring? Do I want people to know that I care for an agenda? I went through all these mental calisthenics. I really do have to work to care about somebody else's agenda. I'm a relational person. I care about the agenda of the people that I'm leading, but guess why? So that I can help them be more effective, so we can do great things together. And so caring for a peer takes a discipline even for a relational person. And for some of you that are relational like me, I just set you free because you admitted something.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think you shared something that a lot of people think that don't talk about it. They don't share that.
Admit it.
Yeah,
they don't talk about it. They don't even
especially
admit
not
it
for
to
millions
themselves.
of people that are listening to this podcast right now. But yeah, that's a true statement.
But let's talk about the one that you and I both agreed that is the one I stay the longest, and it's actually number 2. It's learning. And it's not that I don't love to learn. I can remember as a 4 or 5-year-old kid just reading. I love to learn. I love a lesson. A lesson learned is better than a buck put in the bank, in my opinion, because the return on a lesson is brilliant. But why would I answer that I stay there the longest? It's because, one, I'm vetting the lesson. Again, you said air the dirty laundry. When I'm learning something from somebody, I'm vetting it from what I really believe. I'm a very strong-willed, very opinionated person. I bet you that's the first time you were aware of that, Chris. And what I realize is in learning a lesson, I really want to make sure it's a lesson or it's somebody else's opinion. I want to make sure if it will stand the test of something or if it's just a cute little idea.
Yeah.
And so I stay long with a lesson because when I determine that it is a lesson, I want it to drive the behaviors and the beliefs deep within me. And so lessons and learning is extraordinarily important to me because as I discover things, lessons, things that I learn along the way, I really expect a return for them. So I stay partly because it's hard, it's difficult to learn. I stay also because I'm vetting, am I really learning? But I also stay because when I am learning, I want a great return off of whatever that lesson is that I'm learning.
So let me interrupt you for a second. So when we take this learning, because you are an avid learner, and we tie it to your peers, and we tie it to learning about them, learning what they do, learning their skill set. I'm not going to say that you are you challenge what they think, but you want it to stand the test of time. You want, from an integrity standpoint, for it to be lived out in that individual. You want to learn more about them and see that fleshed out. And that's what takes you the longest in regards to learning and connecting with people, because you do the same thing with concepts and principles that you would do with people.
I do. In fact, I think that when we talk about learning, and you're talking about in any kind of a setting, whether it's from a book, from a person, that how you receive it is what the lesson is all about. So let me tell you, I think when I learn something about you, Chris, I can discover something about you and appreciate that. So I really learned it. But I think when you give me insight into you, it's one of the most important things that you could ever give me, because I should do something with that lesson, that whether it's from a teacher, whether it's from a boss, somebody above us, whether it's from a book, when somebody gives you the gift of insight, then it should be treated as something that deepens your ability to be effective. So when you take a moment and you share something about you, I'm learning about you as my peer. That is a great gift of a lesson that as I learn about you, it should change behavior and change perceptions within me.
That's good.
Your lessons, what I learn about you, should be applied within me so that we can do something greater together. So in this context of learning about another human being, a person beside you, I find it incredibly incredibly important that we take this as if it's a lesson in algebra in
That's good.
sixth grade.
Good. Yeah.
I take that as a gift that will make me more effective. Again, why are we doing this? This is a leadership loop.
That's right.
This is not a relationship loop. If it's a relationship loop, tell me about your mom and them. Tell me about something that you like. Oh, that's good. Let me celebrate it. No. This is a leadership loop. I'm learning from you so I can be more effective with you.
I have seen you, as you were talking about that, I've seen you do that with different people in our organization, so that they want to follow you, so that they want to be a part of the bigger picture, the mission, the organization that we are doing. And I think so many people, we talk about this in different leadership things, and you see this all the time, where they get an opportunity to be a part of an organization, a part of a team, and have a peer, and they forget all about the caring. They forget all about the learning. And as John mentioned, a lot of people go directly to number 6 in the loop, which is leading, and they're missing the foundation of influencing and connecting with people.
Let me give you one example, okay?
Yeah.
You don't have a clue where I'm going, but it's all about you, okay? This is all, again, please contextualize, because I did spend a good bit of time talking about lessons that I learned, but this is a leadership loop, not a relationship loop. Now watch. Just recently, you gave my wife an experience that I would have never thought of. You listened to her about a year ago talk with your wife about something that she wanted to do. And when the opportunity came up, you brought it up to Stephanie, which I guess is a peer. It's definitely a relationship. You don't have a working relationship with Stephanie, but you both were on the same page trying to influence the call where we're going. You took time, just happened. You took time by reminding her what you heard her say before and how you have been diligently working on giving her an experience she could not have gotten by herself. Last night, and in multiple nights since, what she has done is she has shared with me the significance, not of what the experience is going to be, of how that linked back to what you learned about her in a conversation that was irrelevant to a relational thing. Oh, it was good to know Stephanie had this ambition, this bucket list. That's all wonderful. No. You have a leadership hat on, and you learned a lesson and applied it. Don't miss that is all relational. Got it. But it was leadership too. There is a great sense of leadership in that example.
It's good. It's a good example. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's get back to the loop now. Let's move on, and I want to talk a little bit about, from your leadership perspective and how you lead, what comes easiest to you. And we were both in agreement on this one as well. Talk a little bit about which one it is, and then let's unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, so it's verbalizing.
Yeah.
And this was an easy one. I'm a words of affirmation person. I want words of affirmation. I give words of affirmation. I believe words of affirmation. I see that good, that highlightable item in another human being. And so whether it's peers, whether it's people, whether it's people, I love how you contextualize this at the beginning of this podcast. For us, we all have peers outside of our industry, outside of the walls of our organization. And it just comes easy for me to find, highlight. I've been saying lately, it's easy for me to note something celebratable in a person's life, and it's easy for me to notate it.
Yeah.
I love to note it. I love to see powerful things in another person. I love just as much to notate it. Tell them I noticed it. That's just, to me, that really does come easy, and specifically in building a leadership influence loop.
You've challenged us as a team before, and I was smiling when you said the note versus notate, because you challenged us and you said, hey, watch what's going on in your team. Watch what's going on with your peers. Make a note of it, but then I want you to notate it, and it's been powerful because you've been able. Now with text and it's so easy to notate to people what you have been able to see and observe in their leadership and verbalize that to them. So what does that do? Whether they're a peer or whatever, it raises your influence.
That's right.
It raises your connection, and everybody wins. The organization wins. You win, they win, everybody wins across that. Now, with this, we've also talked a little bit about when one of these areas in this loop come very easy to you as a leader, there's a blind spot to that. There is hey, maybe I do this too much. Maybe and I'm smiling at Mark, right? Like it just comes so naturally, and it oozes out of you as a leader that you don't want it to come across to where it's not authentic in the communication and connection with them. Talk a little bit about that from your leadership. What things you've learned on how to control that? Maybe you want to I want to notate that. But then you've held back, and then maybe other times where you've reached out to people that you're not even that close to, but are a peer in the leadership world, and you've done it. It's had a great impact. Just talk about some of those examples.
Yeah. So about 14 years ago, maybe 15 now, I can remember. I could give her name. I can go back to the conversation. A friend of mine that was not under my leadership but was on the same team came to me and said, this person over here does not like you. I thought we had a great relationship. And, I struggled with people pleasing all of my life. John helped me go from pleasing people to leading people. And it bothered me so bad. And I said, why? And they said, because they think you're fake. And I went, I'm fake? And they said, yeah, you compliment people too much. You verbalize affirmation way too much. And I went, how do you verbalize affirmation too much? I think the world can't get enough affirmation. I mean, give me some more. Give me some.
If they're breathing.
Yes, if they're breathing, they need affirmation, right? It really was perplexing to me. And I sat down with the individual and I said, can you help me understand how I compliment too much? And she said to me, there is no way you can believe that much good about another human being. And I worked through that. I really do. And then she said, here's the really straw that broke the camel back. I heard you telling one person the same thing you had told somebody else the day before. And she says, you don't give enough specificity with your affirmation when you verbalize.
That's good.
Now, the lesson for me was not I'm verbalizing too much. She had some wounds in her life to where somebody had buttered her up and then behind her back sliced her down. I didn't know that. I'm not responsible for that with her. I didn't learn to stop verbalizing. Here's what I did learn. Verbalize with specifics.
Love it.
Be very clear when you're verbalizing. I love you. You're awesome. Way to go. You're a team player. All of that's wonderful. But you're a team player because the other day I saw you put aside your agenda for someone else's agenda.
Awesome.
Go be specific in verbalizing, or you will be, you really will diminish your intent in verbalizing affirmation.
Yeah, and when it's a natural gift, and it's a gift that you have as a leader, as an individual, like it is for Mark, that's the blind spot. That's what we've got to be aware of on the other side of that. And so it may not be verbalizing for you. It may be somewhere else on the loop, but that's an application. That's something that we want you to be aware of through Mark's leadership that you need to pay attention to. Yeah. The last thing I'll say about this, and then I'm going to throw you a little curveball, and we're going to talk about one more, is that I have seen you I've seen your growth in this, and I've seen you a lot lately where not only are you verbalizing with specifics, but you're tying it to a value of the organization. So think about this, right? We have peers inside our organization. And when you verbalize this with them in front of a team, or maybe even one-on-one, you tie it back to, hey, I saw this, we exceed expectations. Now let me tell you what so-and-so did. Yeah. And so not only are you specific on the value that you want to verbalize and lift up in the culture of our organization as a leader, but then you're specific with the example. And I can think of several of them. And so I would just encourage you not only to be specific, as Mark talked about, but then tie it to the value that's important to you or the organization. Yeah. All right, the last one I want to talk about, this comes, I've seen you do this and from a leadership standpoint where John talks about, and this is an infinite loop, right? We know that this is going to be ongoing, where he says, hey, the last one is succeeding. And what I love about this, notice we didn't even talk about leading, number 6 today, right? Like you do all these other things, you're going to be able to lead. Where he says, man, we want to win with people. Yeah. We want to do this with people. And you want to do it with your peers. You want to do it with those that are on your team. Talk about the importance of this to you as a leader of, man, we're not doing something alone. And as we grow our influence, we've got to be paying attention to what's going on with our peers because they're leading other units and, rising tide raises all boats and we want to win together. Talk about your passion as a leader to do that with people, with leaders and not to succeed on your own.
I love John's definition of success. We're talking about succeeding. I love his definition of success where he says success is when those that know you the most think the most of you. And I think so many times we want to be seen as a world leader or as an influencer. We want people that have to say we're good people because we sign their checks. We spend more time in wanting people that get benefit by saying we're successful to get us to say that we're successful. Or we spend so much time getting someone that can promote us to more success to see us as successful. What I love about succeeding in this loop is you're succeeding with people that don't have to say you're successful, and you're succeeding with people that you don't try to impress so that they will promote you.
That's right.
This is success with people that has no vested ability to promote you or to help you succeed. And when you can succeed with your peers, you have real success. Yeah. You have a success because those that know you the most, those people that think like you, they're the people that have the same amount of responsibility or not. They're the same people that have the same frustration of being the second man, third man, 10th man down the pole. They have all the same challenges and they watch you from their vantage point and they go, wow, that guy is successful. Yeah. See, in our organization anymore, Chris, you know this. In our organization anymore, and I've had to hire even recently some outside talent that I just needed to help me get to a certain level in the organization. When I promote internally or even somebody from the outside in and give another promotion, it is extremely important to me that their peers demand their promotion before I, as their, forgive this word, superior, promotes them. Yeah. And when peers are saying that person needs to be promoted, you have been successful at peer-to-peer leadership.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I've seen not only you do that with individual leaders, but then also different business units inside our organization. And there are leaders that are peers inside your world, whatever that might look like. We've talked about it a couple of different ways, to where you could kind of check out, and it's not a celebration of as it should be because you're worried about competing and you're not winning with people. And what I love about this, the example I was thinking, and I'm going to throw it to you to close up this session today on the Leadership Loop, is I was thinking about our nonprofit and the John Maxwell Leadership Foundation and George Hoskins, who's doing an incredible job leading over there. Yep. And while the other business units are for-profit, that at times they're succeeding and doing incredible work, impacting people all around the world. And yet we could just sit over there. He's a peer of mine, right? And he works directly and reports directly to you, but we could just sit over there and say, man, you're doing a good job, whatever. Yeah. And be like, man, I wish my numbers were that good. But instead, we are celebrating and we want to help complete him and how can we help him and all those different things. And so I think it's really encouraging to make sure. And we started off by talking about this silos, and we talked about subcultures, that as leaders, we get it. You're competitive and you're on a career path and you're on this track. But man, I want you just to slow down a little bit and think about the peers that are inside your life and some of the examples that Mark, you shared with us, and how do you do a better job of influencing and connecting with those by applying the principles that John gave us in this leadership loop.
Yeah. I think a really important next step for all of us, the second most read book of John's library for me, the first is Developing the Leader Within You 2.0, but the second one that I've read the most is The 360-Degree Leader, which is where John really talks about how to lead at the peer level. And so for all of our viewers, all of our listeners, we're going to make that available to you in our show notes. We'll give you a link there. Use the promo code podcast, and we'll give you a 15% discount of that book. And here's a thought. Buy that book for a couple of people on your team. Maybe give that book to a peer or two that you're trying to gain influence with. I think you're going to really find that very, very beneficial. I want to close today with a listener comment. In fact, it's going to be a listener comment question, but it's from Mandul. He listened to the podcast Leading Difficult Personalities. I can't remember, Chris, if you were my co-host in that, but I bet you were my case study. Leading Difficult Personalities.
I'm not answering this question, by the way.
We'll put that link in the show notes as well. But here's what Mandul said. He said, I'm very grateful for this podcast. It's really helping me grow. Is there any podcast or book that helps in knowing my leaders better? Something that helps me figure out the big five with my team? And there's two books that really kind of come to mind as you're asking that question, Mandul. Number one is The 25 Ways to Win with People. Brilliant book on just the qualities and the ways that you can interact with teammates, peers that will help you. That's 25 Ways to Win with People. The other is The 17 Qualities of a Team Player. The 17 qualities of a team player. And I'll tell you what we'll do, since Mandul was so good at asking such a great question, and plus he has a good taste of podcasts. Mandul and team, we're going to put those books in our show notes, and using podcast as the promotion code there, we'll also give you 15% off of those books as well. Mandul, thank you.
12 choices leaders make to fuel their influence. Talk about increasing their influence. We're going to give you some things that you make choices, maybe even on a daily basis, and you're not even aware of it, that will increase or fuel your influence. And we talk about that leadership is influence. We interchange the words all the time here at Maxwell Leadership. And so what we want to do is generate some thoughts, some discussion around how do you grow this? What does it look like with some of these simple terms?
Yeah.
And you created a chart, which will be, you can download it in the Learner's Guide.
Yep.
And we're going to kind of go through this and banter them back and forth.
I think that'd be a good way to do it. And you use the word simple. It is a simple, these are not rocket science, but they are. It's so amazing to me when I get into discussions with people. Actually, we'll tell people, we've said it here many, many times, is that people are watching you all the time. And people always agree, 100%, they agree. And then I'll say, but what are they watching for? Now, do you remember the answer to that? What are they watching for?
Where I'm going to lunch?
No.
I think about how you're leading your actions, how you're reacting. Reaction, that's another.
Oh, that's huge.
Man, we could talk about that for a while as a leader. How you're interacting, what your behavior is. Really, when it comes down to, I tell a lot of people, we're really in the behavioral change business. Yep. Not only we start with ourselves first, continuing to work on our own behaviors, but then helping leaders and cultures develop, their leaders. It also goes back to the definition that we get from kind of Greg Cagle with the culture piece, which is how are you thinking, acting, and interacting as a leader? And so that's what they're watching for. That's it.
I love that. Although I do, when I ask that in large meetings, always someone says they're watching for you to mess up. Okay, no. There may be that odd individual that would like for you to mess up, but for the most part, people don't want you as their leader to mess up. They want you to succeed, because when you succeed, they succeed. So I think they're watching you for your actions, your reactions, your interactions, and your behaviors. And why are they watching for this? What are they doing with that information?
Yeah, remember, in order to increase your influence with people, You don't get to determine what level of influence you have with them. They get to determine. So you don't walk into a room and say, I have level 4 influence with Perry Holly. That's not how it works. How it works is that Perry would say, hey, Chris has level 4 influence with me. Right. And so when you think about it that way, what they're watching for is really, as a leader, is how do we get from level 1 influence as a titled leader to them to level 2 where they're giving you permission? Well, they're not going to give you permission to lead them or influence them until they watch your behaviors before they watch your actions.
Yeah, so I'm trying to determine, am I going to let you lead me?
Yeah.
So these 12 things,
let's do it.
They're simple. Maybe we should do a little point counterpoint. Which I'm going to give you the easy side. You can take what I think helps your influence.
I did notice it was the easier side, so I appreciate that.
I give you the helps influence, and I'll take the could hurt your influence.
Okay.
So why don't you go first?
Yeah, the first thing we have here is what could actually help your influence is we have the word ask. And
versus tell.
Tell.
Okay.
Right? So ask for us would be, are you really curious? Increasing your influence. You've got to ask questions. Good leaders, right, ask great questions. And you have to do that in order to be curious. When you're curious and you're asking people questions and you want to know their point of view, then it's going to increase your influence. It's going to help you.
Yeah. And then if I take the tell side of that, is I'm going to tell people what to do. I'm kind of leaning on that level 1 influence again. I'm not, I'm the smartest one in the room. Like I have all the answers. So I like influence building with ask says that you're involving me in the decision. Tell says it's all about me. And it becomes almost like a dictator. And it really causes people, we mentioned in a previous podcast about salute and stay mute, just do what you're told, which then reduces engagement. It's not a winning formula. Right. So I definitely want to be on the ask side.
Yeah, I love that. Second one we have for you is focus versus distracted.
Yes.
And for me, when I think about how you increase your influence, when we use the word focus, it's really about, do your people feel like when you're having a conversation with them or you're in a meeting with them, that this is the most important thing that you could be working on or talking about at that moment, no matter what it is? Or are you distracted like you talked about? And so in order to increase your influence, you need to be focused on the team, the individuals, the conversation, the meeting, the people. I'll never forget, I was visiting a client of ours, and this individual that was in this organization, I would have level 1 influence with him. He has level 1 influence with me. We don't really know each other that well. We know our titles in the different organizations. And I'll never forget, I walked into his office really for maybe the first or second time that we met. He was working on his laptop, and he saw me walk in. He shut his laptop, stood up, shook my hand, and then we had a 25-minute conversation like I was the most important thing. And I thought, left there, I goes, man, like your influence has grown with me because of the way that you interacted and focused on.
Yeah, versus being distracted. If he'd have left his laptop open, his phone's on the desk, he's looking around, checking on text messages, reading stuff while he's appearing to try and talk to you. Are you influenced by that? Are you willing to give that person influence over you that you're going to willingly participate with them? I don't think so. It really speaks, distraction speaks that you don't value me. And so when you're focused and pay attention and you're present, you value people to do that.
Well, the third one, I'm going to let you go first here, because I struggle with this a little bit. And so I want you to talk about the negative side of this.
Yeah, okay? So it was neat versus messy. This I probably could have used different words, but
I like it. We're keeping it simple.
Yeah, but I'm thinking if you walk in my office and I'm completely disorganized, it kind of leads into unprepared. I don't know where my things are. I'm searching for things. I'm disheveled, disarray. It could even carry over into my dress and how I appear to people that I'm not put together. It really breeds some concern with people that you don't have it all together. Yeah. Now, is this saying if you have a messy office, you can't be an effective leader? No, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying it just, if you're trying to gain influence with people, I'm more influenced by people who are organized and put together. So are you a neat freak?
No, I'm not. And that's why I was like, I want to hear your side of the story first. But I think it's interesting about this, what I was thinking about, is that we talk about increasing your influence. And so in this example that I'm going to give you, it's really about increasing your influence from level 2 to level 3. So to your point, let's say I'm working for a leader and he has level, or she has level 2 influence with me, and I go into his or her office and it's a complete disaster. And I start thinking about, man, do we really know what our KPIs are? Do we really know where the next project is? Whatever. And I go, I don't know. Now, some people that might not bother. And so you just got to begin thinking about that. And so I do think also under the neat side that people do try to model leadership in certain ways, and your people will follow at sometimes. And I think this is a great way to be able to do that. We have talk versus yell.
I think this was obvious.
Yeah, this is right. Here's what I thought when I said this to increase your influence is that people care more about hearing your voice than it is what you're saying at times. Mm-hmm. And this really goes back to communication as a leadership competency that there's a deficit of this in any organization around the world. And so they do care about that. Now they may not necessarily care exactly what you're saying, but they want to hear the leader's voice. And the more they hear your voice, I think that'll increase your influence versus
yelling or raising your voice or losing your temper, having emotion around this. I'm thinking about what we talked earlier. What are people watching for? Your actions, that's obviously. How about your reactions? How do you handle bad news? How do you handle difficult information? And if you go into to anger or emotional spraying on people, your emotions, and raising your voice and that sort of thing, it is an instant turnoff for most people when it comes to influencing me. I'm going to back away, pull back on that. I'm much more influenced by a consistent behavior of you're managed when it's good, you're managed when it's bad. You talk it's a respect. It's a advent of respect toward people. Is I don't yell at people.
Yeah,
that's disrespectful. And so it may seem like a small one, but it's probably more obvious than some of the others. But
and I think in the heat of the moment, and when you're backs up against the wall, some leaders don't understand that.
Good.
And I would encourage you to dig into that a little bit. Well, the fifth one that we're going to bring to you today is you help your influence by what we call kind of measured or measuring versus maybe being rushed or reactive in a way. And I'll let you speak to that in just a minute. For me, when I think about the word measured or measuring, it comes with thought. The leader has thought through. It's a measured approach. The other thing I took it was also measuring results or measuring what the team is doing or where you're going or what you're leading. And, what you measure gets done. And everybody wants to be a part of a winning team, right, versus a losing team. And so the only way to really know if you're winning versus losing and how to correct and what not to correct is to measure what you're doing.
Yeah, I think what I was going with measured versus rushed is that are you and you said it was thoughtful. Are you more precise? Are you rushed? Are you just going from thing to thing to thing? Is it too much for people to keep up? You don't have a measured approach to things, so you're making me feel almost disheveled again and out of sorts, and you're in such a hurry with things that you don't. John would say, stop and walk among the crowd, be among the people, that you're always rush to do things that it's problematic.
I love it. All right, the next one we're going to talk about, number 6 on the chart, is on time versus late. For me, this is really about respecting other people. And I need to get better at this. I think even the way we calendar things could help you become more on time, just so that you're showing respect and engagement level with other team members.
Yeah, and I think it speaks for itself that if you're late, you're disrespecting, you're not being there. Next one says margin versus maxed out. Why are we laughing? Because this is our life. This is actually something we battle with right now.
We do. And several, if you haven't listened to an episode we did several weeks ago around the new kind of hot buzz around quiet quitting, I would encourage you to do that. We talked a little bit about this, and there is that we've got to do a better job as leaders of modeling margin in our own life, and then also talking about and encouraging your team to have margin in their life. And when you do that, I think it increases your influence.
Yeah, when you're maxed out, you're just sending a bad message. People don't. I don't even want to approach my leader because I don't want to add something else. They seem like they're stressed out. They're going to fall apart. They're over the top. They're consumed completely. Yeah, I'll just keep it to myself. Now my level of engagement.
Number 8 is respond versus react. And this, for me, when you talk about, sometimes when people will engage you, voicemail, text, email, this is where I went with this personally, and I don't respond, which happens then that is nothing favorable with your influence. But when you do respond in a way that it's consistent and it increases your influence. I actually, just this morning, before we recorded this episode, there was an email where a team member of mine sent that added value to me in some research that I was doing. And I had not responded to it. Didn't even, acknowledge it, but I was grateful for it. And I thought, man, I need to respond. And so I just responded and said, thank you. This helped me a ton. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
But the fact that and think about what that feels like for us when, we add value to people, we're doing something, we get no response. We're just like,
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think about this also from a different approach on that, about react. Again, it's, I call it mind the gap between what happened, what someone said. If I go quickly, as there's no gap, then I have a reaction that's usually not that good.
Yeah.
But if I can pause for a moment and have a gap there, I can respond in a more thoughtful way. But I actually like where you took it too, is that there's really a lot of influence building in being responsive to people. That's maybe can add that to the list.
Yeah.
The next one, number 9, says consistent versus erratic. Boy, that's a big one. It kind of goes back to some of the ones we talked about. It kind of relates back to, are you, when you're triggered, when things go south, when there's tension in the air, a challenge, are you all over the place, or does your emotion and your behavior have a consistency to it?
Yeah, and I think this, for me, when you increase your influence through consistency, it comes down to the word approachable. And I think when you are approachable, no matter what is going on around you, that increases your influence.
I agree.
Number 10, the difference here is listener versus talker. And for me, our team, our people want to be heard, period. Now, we're not saying hear them. We're saying listen to them. I say that because I maybe have that being told to me at home sometimes. And so I think the better listener, we all can become better listeners. And I think the better listener we become, the more we'll increase our influence.
Yeah, you talk too much. You don't trust people that talk all the time.
Too many words.
Again, it goes back to being measured about what are you talking? Are you listening? Are you listening more than you talk? People, they're influenced by people that ask good questions and then listen to the answers. You don't have to be always talking over people to do that.
Or whatever they're talking about, you got a better story and you're one-upping
beat my
them
story,
and, all that stuff.
Don't do that. Number 11, I threw this in because can you have a sense of humor, or are you always serious? Humor versus serious.
I've worked for a lot of leaders, and I've had some serious, right? But they had great influence with me. But there's just a different level of influence and connection for me personally. Maybe not everybody listening, to where when there's humor, and I just think it drives realness, it drives engagement. And then in turn increases your influence.
And I love it because we do laugh a lot here. We take the work serious, but we don't take ourselves seriously, and we take shots at each other and we laugh at each other. Even here in the studio today, we've laughed pretty hard with.
We're
Jake.
an hour and a half late because Jake kept throwing daggers at us.
Yes,
but we laughed.
No, we laughed. We had a good time. All right, number 12, one of my favorites is: are you teachable, or are you the know-it-all? And I just find that. It's one of my favorite words in leadership is that are you showing yourself teachable, or do you the leader that comes in and you have all the answers, you never ask any questions, you tell people all the things, and it just doesn't bode well for influence when you have all the answers.
As a leader, I never forget this illustration, and I'm not sure who I heard it from first, where you want to be that leader, that individual, to where when you walk in a room and then you leave the room feels smarter than it did maybe before you had that conversation. But what you don't want in a leader, or you don't want to represent yourself and won't increase your influence, is if you walk into a room and they go, well, man, he obviously thinks he was the smartest person in the room. Remember, I said thinks because I guarantee you were not.
You never are.
But that just has that aura when it's not good when you walk in as if you know it all and you're the subject matter expert. You may be. But, man, you do not need to do that. You need to go in there with a teachable heart. And I think if you do that, it increases your influence.
One of the first things he said was when he dove into environment. I feel like there is so much meat there. And one of the first things he said was that leaders do what leaders experience together. And one of the things that I remember John always saying is that you can't transfer the emotion, the lessons, everything that you have and you experience when you go somewhere and you try to bring it back to your team. And anybody who has ever gone anywhere and they've experienced something so powerful, you try to come back and you tell it to someone and it's like, you just can't transfer it. And so can you talk a little bit about the value of those experiences and that environment, and how do you bring your team with you to experience that so you don't have to come back and try to explain it to them?
I love this part of this lesson, Tracy, because, and I love what you just said. When you've been given a lot is required. Mm-hmm. John's often talked about the leadership bubble. We've seen people, I've been with John now for 22 years, and I've seen people come in, and I've seen people excel. I've seen people leave, and I've seen them almost go back to where they were before they ever joined John Maxwell's team. And that was perplexing to me. You know, how can you excel as such a great leader, then you go try something new, and it's harder than you thought? And I don't take great joy or pride in that people are very successful here and then not as successful other places, because I've seen the exact opposite too. People be very successful in John's organization, leave for one reason or another, and then go be very successful. But I think what John is teaching right here on environment, that there does exist in all of us. There is a leadership bubble. There's a learning bubble. There is a relationship bubble. We can get into environments that actually make us look bigger, better, and more effective than perhaps we would be in another environment.
Number 5, he paid attention to fundamentals and details. And probably the classic detail illustration was the first day in practice, he'd go to the locker room and he'd teach all of his players how to put on their socks. He'd sit on the bench and he'd say, every time you put on basketball socks, to do it like I did. And he would sit on the bench and he would literally show them how to put it on. And then he watched them all. They had to practice putting on socks until pleasing, because the number one enemy of a basketball player is blisters. And if you put socks on the way I tell you, you'll never have blisters. And what's so funny is I've heard some of his ball players who became coaches, and what they'll do is the first thing they do is teach their players how to put on their socks. John Wooden said in your notes, perfection is an impossibility, but striving for perfection is not. Do the best you can. That's what counts. I asked him, John, what do you miss most about coaching? He looked at me and said, not the games. What I miss is the practices. I loved the practices, because if you practice correctly, the game is a given. And that's why I love the expression, make every day your masterpiece. I said, talk to me about practice, since you love practice so much. He said, as I would watch my players practice, every once in a while you got a player and he's just dogging it. He's just not giving you 100%. I'd go over to that player and I'd say, now, you're not giving me 100% today, and you need to up it. I would make sure they understood this point. I would tell them, you can't give me 50% today and make up for it tomorrow. If you only give me 50% today, you've lost 50%. Because you can't tomorrow give me 150%. You can't do that. In fact, he laughed. He said, I keep telling Bill Walton when he broadcasts all those games, quit saying that the player out there on the floor is giving 110%. I call him on the phone and say, Bill, you can't give 110%. It's impossible. The most anybody can ever give is 100%, and very few people ever do that. So, you can't give more than you have to give. So if you give 50% today, you can't give 150. You can't say, well, tomorrow I'm going to work twice as hard. He said, it's impossible. You're going to only work as hard as you can work, and they can't work any harder. So if you leave 50% today, you never make it up. It's forever lost. And I thought to myself, wow, boy, do I need to approach every day of my life that same way. Well, I'll slack off today, but tomorrow. And then I have that wonderful quote by John Wooden, who said, once the opportunity arrives, it's too late to prepare. Wow. Once the opportunity arrives, it's too late to prepare. That's why when people come to me and say, I'm not in a leadership position now, but boy, if I ever get one of those positions, I'm going to learn how to be a leader. Once opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare. You should be preparing right now to be the leader so that when the day comes, you're ready for it. Remember this, if you're given a position, you'll always be over your head. But if you grow into a position, you'll only be over your head for a short time, and then you'll grow beyond it. So the only way to keep from being over your head on a continual basis is to grow into your position. And then one more quote of his before we go to another reason why he was so successful as a head coach. He said, if you prepare properly, you may be outscored, but you will never lose. You always win when you make the full effort to do the best of which you're capable. In fact, he told me there were times that he would walk off, a few times when they truly lost a game, he would walk off the floor, and he said, many times I was not one bit discouraged or disappointed because my team gave best effort. There are times we walked off when we won, and I was ticked. He said he called it a cheap victory. He said, we won, but we didn't give it our best effort. And he said, what you strive for as a leader is not the win. You strive for best effort. That's what you strive for, best effort.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.